So you found the skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey there YouTube, the Dapper Dinosaur here, back here for another look at In His Image's inability to identify dinosaurs, tell what birds are, and basically get things wrong. That being said, like I said before, I like In His Image, so I'm trying not to be too harsh on this one.
You can see that it was feathered. You can also see from this slab here that the tail completely lacks the neural and hemal arches that we would expect if this thing walked upright rather than, say, flew.
What? You don't need hemal or neural arches to walk as a biped with a spine roughly parallel to the ground. And the fact that the tail of most Paravian dinosaurs was stiff after the first few caudal vertebrae was an adaptation specifically to assist in balance. So, far from being evidence that this couldn't be a dinosaur, it's evidence that it certainly was.
Alright, so, and by the way, I am periodically getting drinks of water because I have already tried to record this once and it didn't work out so well, so I'm having to record it again. So if I go quiet for a second, it's because I'm gulping down a little bit of water. So Raptor, you have there, it has the obvious feathers on the upper left and bottom left. There's obvious feathers. The hip note on the right-hand one, you can kind of tell it's kind of smashed, so it's kind of hard to tell, but it does kind of resemble a sacrum. And then note on the upper left and upper right, where those black arrows are, pointing down the tail, there's no hemal or neural arches. Raptor undoubtedly was a bird, and it probably did look something like that. Move on to Psittacosis. Psittacosis means funeral pyre wizard. Well, maybe if we can mount the feathered dinosaurs on a funeral pyre, this thing will light it for us. Anyways, at least the idea of feathered dinosaurs. This thing actually was somewhat bird-like in the fact that it actually brooded its eggs. But you notice on this that the tail here on the middle image has very distinct hemal and neural arches. Very distinct. It's very easy to tell that these are hemal and neural arches. On the right there, you see that there's a very strong iliac blade. This thing could have walked upright. I think they posed it pretty poorly over here on the left. But this thing could have walked upright. Obvious muscular attachment on the tail, plenty of counterweight. So this thing, as a dinosaur, yeah, that's pretty likely.
Okay, but do you know how it brooded its eggs? By covering them with its feathers. And you know how we know this about oviraptorosaurs? Because they've been preserved in brooding position. So we know that they had to have had feathers, because that brooding posture wouldn't keep the embryos warm unless you have bird-like wing feathers.
So, anyways, moving along swiftly, we're at Dilong. Now, Dilong is, it means emperor dragon. The word long in Chinese means dragon. All right, so if you tell somebody in Chinese that, something is long, what you're telling them is the dragon. So if you have a long stick, well, you have a dragon stick. That's what you have. All right, so that's just a cool little fact for you. So you can see what it was found here. It's kind of a fragmentary skeleton. There are some caudal vertebrae, there are some vertebral column vertebrae, neck vertebrae, etc.
That's actually a lot of skeleton. Many dinosaur finds are far more fragmentary than that. Also, all vertebrae are part of the vertebral column. Like, by definition. Maybe he meant dorsal vertebrae? I'm not sure.
It's kind of fractured. This is a reconstruction, obviously. But as you can see, there are neural and hemal arches down most of the tail. And that's a very prominent iliac blade. So I've tentatively gone with this thing being a non-feathered dinosaur rather than a feathered bird, especially since it was not found with feathers. It was found with what are called quote-unquote proto-feathers. But that's tentative. If we get a better specimen, we might be able to examine more. And of course, I won't be able to examine it because no evolutionist in their right mind will let me into a museum to examine these specimens, because I might find something that would damage the theory, and I would have no problem telling people about it.
Interestingly, Dilong is a tyrannosauroid, and the filaments were long, straight strands that probably would have looked a lot like hair in life. This might not be modern feathers in the way that we think of them on birds, but then it is also not the scaly or scute-covered skin that In His Image says is characteristic of reptiles. So was Dilong not a bird, but also not a reptile? Because I'll agree it's not a bird, but it certainly was fluffy, and it was certainly a reptile. Further, I know of no prohibition on allowing creationists to examine fossils. In fact, it would be impossible to stop them, since fossils, by your own admission, are available to simply purchase. Indeed, the Creation Museum run by Answers in Genesis purchased an exceptionally well-preserved Allosaurus specimen, and they could study it to their heart's content. But they don't.
Anyways, moving on to Eosinopteryx.
So, I don't really want to spend much time on Eosinopteryx, but I just wanted to point something out. The skeletal reconstruction is by David Peters and is from his blog, The Pterosaur Heresies. Peters is a pseudo-paleontologist who is known for drawing fanciful reconstructions, not accepting any criticism, and for doing his research via Photoshop filter. What tipped me off was the strange integument outline, the awkward posture with a very uneven neck soft tissue outline, and the strangely colored pectoral girdle. All of these are things Peters likes to do. If you are looking online for images of fossil taxa, check to see if they are Peters' work, and if they are, I strongly suggest you not use them.
Note 2 in the upper left here, that's fossilized dinosaur skin. That looks very, very similar to crocodilian skin, doesn't it? It certainly doesn't look anything at all like bird skin.
Actually, it doesn't look much like crocodilian skin at all. Crocodilians have mostly rectangular or rhomboid scutes, but what it does look like is the scaly skin you'll find on an eagle's foot.
Alright, Calindrodromus. Calindrodromus is kind of cool. It's found with some scales on it. It's known as its name means Calinda runner. And it's a Russian dinosaur. We don't have too many of those on this list. Most of what we have comes out of China, but it's a Russian dinosaur. And this Russian dinosaur has some very, very cool aspects to it.
It does indeed have some very cool aspects to it. One of them being that Calindrodromeus is an ornithischian, not a theropod, like all the other dinosaurs up to this point. In fact, the finding that it had protofeathers was a great shock to the scientific community, which, being generally conservative in their claims, had been operating under the idea that the evolution of feathers probably started well inside the theropod clade, perhaps at Coelurosauria. This pushed the origin of feathers potentially as far back as the common ancestor of all dinosaurs, and since pterosaurs are also fluffy, perhaps even to the common ancestor of all ornithodyrans. However, there is still much controversy over the possible homology of pterosaur pycnofibers and dinosaur protofeathers.
You can see here it's got some very, very obvious neural and hemal spines running down the tail. They're a little less obvious as you get to the point, but they are there if you look at it. It has a fairly spindly iliac blade, but you can tell that there's vertebra running down the middle of it if you look at the left picture. So it definitely has articulated vertebra. Why they chose to give it feathers, I don't know. But it definitely does not have feathers.
Well, this is why. Because it definitely does have feathers. In fact, a simple Google search would have brought up extensive pictures of Calindrodromeus' down-like feathers. This isn't even a question. It was covered in protofeathers on most of its body except the tail, the distal portions of the limb, and part of the face.
Right, moving along here. Microraptor. Microraptor is cool.
Microraptor is cool because it's in the same family as Velociraptor. This thing is a flying tiny velociraptor with 4 wings and iridescent black feathers like those of a crow.
Alright, Microraptor means small one who seizes. The whole raptor bit. This thing was also found with melanosomes. It would have been black and iridescent. As you can see right from the get-go, though, it has the distinctive tail that you would associate with...
With any dromaeosaurid, such as Dakotaraptor or Velociraptor, that he already said weren't birds?
A bird. Matter of fact, this thing may have very well have been something similar to a sea eagle, considering it ate birds and fish.
So, Microraptor is a bird, but the nearly identical Velociraptor isn't. What gives? Is it that the feathers are so obvious that they can't be hand-waved away?
As you can see here, the tail, very much a rod-like tail. You can see there are feathers where the white arrows are pointing. The black arrow runs the length of the tail, or part of the length of the tail. And as you can see, there are no hemal or neural arches there. Since there's a possible sacrum here, I won't be dogmatic about that, but it is possible here in this upper right image that that's a sacrum.
Well, it is a sacrum, as that's a dinosaur thing, but I'm still confused about this. In his image just showed us that Microraptor doesn't have a keeled sternum, it just has a tail like Velociraptor and a pelvis like any dinosaur. So what makes it a bird and not a dinosaur? But Velociraptor, a dinosaur, but not a bird.
So Microraptor probably did look pretty similar to what we see here in this particular image.
Okay, but then any complaints about other dromaeosaurs being feathery are going to be tossed out of hand at this point. Next, I'm skipping to Ornithomimus, because he has some conspiracy theories about this taxon.
Ornithomimus. This one's going to be fun. Ornithomimus is a very well-known creature. It's called a bird mimic. That's the name, what it means. Except Ornithomimus is classified very poorly, in my opinion, and also in the opinion of Answers in Genesis. They published an article today on birds and feathers. Also, CMI did the same thing, although I don't know if they discussed Ornithomimus. But Ornithomimus is inferred based on some filaments and an ulnar ridge that has some quill knobs on it.
Yes, filaments and quill knobs together are perfectly definitive evidence of feathers. But I would also like to point out that this is a bad skeletal reconstruction. It looks like it's straight out of 1992. The wrists are broken, and the humerus looks like it attaches to the superior side of the coracoid. It's missing gastralia entirely, the skull is far too robust, the mandibular fenestra are far too low on the jaw, the distal portions of the leg are too robust, the dorsal end of the pubic bone doesn't flare nearly enough, etc. I point this out because it becomes relevant in a few seconds.
Now, before we go any further, I want to point out something here. There's been some classification hocus-pocus going on here. Because if you look at this image, note as you go down the length of the tail, you see that there's no real neural or hemal spines on that tail. You have a pygostyle, but not much else.
No.
You're wrong.
It's so wrong.
Wrong, 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 wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong.
Not only is there no pygostyle, but that mount does in fact include the hemal arches. It's just that the foreshortened view in his image pulled off of Wikipedia of the Ornithomimus mount in the Royal Ontario Museum makes them hard to see. But video online shows that indeed the expected arches are all there on the mount he's looking for them on.
Now, if you look at this tail, note that there are neural and hemal spines running the length of the tail.
Which is not accurate. Ornithomimus hemal arches and neural processes taper to essentially nothing at all about a third of the way down the tail. It is the bad drawing which is to blame. People should not be trusting an obsolete at best drawing from probably almost 3 decades ago.
Note also this iliac blade. It's very, 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 very strong. Note also the head. You have 1, 2, 3 openings before you get to the nostrils. Let's look at this one. This particular one on the right in particular. You have 1, 2, 3 total openings.
He should have looked at a higher resolution version of the image. Both the bad skeleton he used as well as the image of the mount at the Royal Ontario Museum have from front to back a nasal opening, a promaxillary fenestra, an antorbital fenestra, and an orbit. It's the exact same number of openings in the skull. It's just that the picture he used in his PowerPoint is so small that the promaxillary fenestra has shrunk to less than a pixel in size.
These are not the same creature, but they're labeled as the same creature. Ornithomimus edmonticus. Now, I would have no problem putting feathers on this guy, the one here in front of you. This guy, however, not so much. This guy here is a reptile. This guy here is not. He's a bird.
Well, since the pictured animal is in fact absolutely not a bird, and does have the hemal arches that are apparently so problematic for avian classification, I honestly don't know what to say. This is far less bird-like than many of the animals that have already been labeled as a dinosaur in his image. I honestly don't have anything. The criteria for birdhood are now so nebulous that a change in orientation of the skeleton and shrinking the image can take an animal from definitely not a bird to a bird. I am sure that this is just an honest mistake, but the fact that it's such an easy mistake to make should say something about how birds really are just a subset of dinosaurs.
It's a good possibility anyway. So you have 2 creatures from 2 separate orders classified as the same species. That's incredible. That is incredible. These people doing this classification have botched it that badly.
This is to my audience. If you ever find yourself thinking that all the experts who have dedicated their lives to studying a topic are so obviously wrong that it's laughable, stop and consider that you, in fact, may be wrong. Because chances are that when all the experts agree, and you used Google image search and PowerPoint to prove them wrong, it's you who are wrong.
Alright, Psittacosaurus. This is where the fun starts. Psittacosaurus has become one of my favorite dinosaurs in the course of this research. And the reason being is this Psittacosaurus, which is called parrot lizard, by the way, Psittacosaurus is probably the most absurd, ridiculous example of a feathered dinosaur.
I can't wait to hear why. Also, this is our second ornithischian dinosaur, and it's a ceratopsian, the group that includes Styracosaurus and Triceratops.
It's probably the singly most absurd and ridiculous one. Now, it is an obligate bipedal dinosaur. It would have walked upright once it was fully mature. We have a lot of specimens of these. We know a lot about their lifestyle because of that. It does have some filaments. We'll get to those in just a minute. It was also likely counter-shaded based on the melanosomes they found. But yeah, this thing is cool. And this is the creature that we found with filaments. You can see them there in the upper left corner. This is actually very well preserved. You even got some skin overlay there and some other stuff. So yeah, this is very well preserved. You've got some filaments there along the tail.
In fact, it is so well preserved that the skin melanosomes are preserved in this specimen. And it's the specimen that allowed us to learn what color the animal was, and that it was counter-shaded. And there is even a preserved cloaca, which as far as I know is the only instance of a preserved cloaca from a Mesozoic dinosaur.
And this is just a better image, but note that there are hemal and neural arches the length of the tail, so this thing would have had no problems walking upright. But
I'm not sure what he means by upright. I think he means with the spine parallel to the ground, or maybe he means with the femur pointing down. It's been bugging me this whole time.
Then you've got those filaments. Now, what are those filaments? Well, filaments, there's a lot of dispute over those. Some people call them proto-feathers. People who call them proto-feathers, I think, are somewhat optimistic. Dr. Alan Fiducia.
Ah yes, Alan Fiducia, the man who loves being wrong about dinosaurs. If I had a dime for every time his discredited ideas were trotted out by creationists, well, I probably wouldn't have to work anymore.
Who is a very highly respected paleoornithologist. In other words, he studies dead birds, fossil birds. He strongly objects to these being called filaments. He thinks they're collagen fibers, which would have exuded out of the creature when it got kind of smushed when it was fossilizing.
But they're not collagen fibers. For one thing, collagen fibers in the skin aren't going to be that long. They tend to be quite short. Further, melanosomes can be found in these filament impressions, something collagen doesn't have. Further, Alan Fiducia has been so backed into a corner at this point by how obviously they are not collagen that he would call virtually everything that has been in this list of dinosaurs a bird, including nearly everything that in his image has said can't be a bird. Fiducia is now a laughingstock. His ideas about bird evolution have no impact and have been shown to be wrong at every turn.
So, Psittacosaurus, you can tell hemoneural arches up and down the tail there. A very obviously reptilian hip with the articulated vertebra running through.
You can't tell anything about those vertebrae's articulation from that angle. But, in fact, like all sacral vertebrae in dinosaurs, they are fused to the sacral arches. What he's seeing is that they simply retain their neural processes.
Now this is why I get so upset about Psittacosaurus. This next image is going to explain to you why it is the most ridiculous, absurd, crazy rendition of feathered dinosaur. Yeah. I'm at a loss. Like, they want me to believe that they have a bunch of hair growing off their tail and nowhere else?
No, they know that it had bristle-like hollow filaments growing from one part of the tail. Because it obviously does, based on one of the best preserved fossils ever found. And they know it didn't have them elsewhere because, as In His Name pointed out himself just seconds ago, they have the skin impression for essentially the whole body. Well, that's it for me for now. Once again, In His Image has shown an extreme lack of familiarity with the anatomy of dinosaurs in general, and birds in particular, as well as an extremely poor level of familiarity with the literature surrounding the taxa he's discussing. Remember to hit like if you like this, or dislike if you didn't, and leave a comment. Also, sharing helps out the channel a lot. I'm Dapper Dinosaur.
I mean, they will, and this is the double standard too, they will cover a dinosaur with feathers if they find quill knobs on it. They're quote-unquote quill knobs. But yet, they won't cover Psittacosaurus with filaments, even though they actually found filaments. They didn't just infer their existence. I mean, this is just absurd. This is ridiculous. No, Psittacosaurus did not look like that.
Thanks for watching. But before you go, I'd like to take a minute to thank my patrons, especially my $20 and above patrons. Ben Tovand, Ian Chen, Speed of Sound, Chris Love, Henry Hutanen, Bob Knob, The Evil Scotsman. My patrons help make this channel possible, and if you'd like to join the team over on Patreon, you can get early access to videos, polls, as well as an exclusive Discord server for patrons only. The minimum tier is only $1 a month, and it goes all the way up to $100 a month if you're feeling really generous. If you'd still like to help the channel, but you feel like a monthly pledge isn't right for you, I also have a Teespring store where you can get merchandise including t-shirts and even a really cool fleece blanket. I also have an Amazon wishlist linked in the description. And if none of those are right for you, then simply just liking and sharing this video is a huge help to the channel. It really helps get me more views and more subscribers, and helps the channell grow.
So you found the skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on this.